All right. Hello, everyone. Uh, Starting off the next podcast, and I'm pretty excited about it. I got some great feedback from the people that I reached out to watch it when I uploaded to social media and spoke and let everyone know about the podcast. Everyone seemed to have some really good reaction to it, and I appreciate everyone who watched the first video, and then I appreciate you watching this video, of course. I'm switching platforms. You notice it's a different angle than before. I'm switching to my computer's camera because when I filmed with my other camera, my GoPro, it made it really hard to upload to YouTube. I don't have very good resources to access like video editing things and uploading that sort of stuff. I have a Google Chromebook, so I'm sure those of you who know about them know that there's not really good video editing software out there for them. But now another thing I want to talk to you about is, or before we get into the video, is what I kind of just said. I know I have some issues speaking on camera, saying like a lot, and I noticed I did that a lot in the last video. And I'm going to try and work on that. You know, it's something that you have to get used to. Speaking in a room by yourself alone, just to a camera, is sort of unfamiliar to a lot of people. I'm a little bit more used to it, but obviously there's still a lot of work to be done, and I will be working on that. And I actually approached this video with a new method of how to present my story, my argument, and sort of my opinion and everything. So yeah, with that being said, I'm ready to get into the topic for discussion. So I want to ask you, what is your greatest problem with your life? Now, I also want to ask you, what is the greatest thing about your life? And for many people, the answer to both of those problems usually have to do with other people. They have to do with the relationships with other people in their lives. And the thing that we're seeing more now is we're having a problem with people. How should I rephrase this? Sorry. When people have this deep problem in their life, some of these problems can be solved within a few months, maybe a few weeks, maybe a year, maybe a few years. Some people, it's not so easy. Some people, that problem is just really deep, and the problem gets worse and it worsens over the years. And a lot of these deep problems that progressively get worse are these problems that can lead to people developing mental health issues and potentially a risk of suicide. So something I've been thinking about for a very long time now is the fact that today in society, in the world, it is the greatest time to be living. The quality of life is the highest it's ever been. Yet suicide rates have increased. It seems counterintuitive. You would think with the quality of life getting better that suicide rates would decrease. And from what we're seeing, that's not the case. And it's sort of a weird reason why. And it makes me wonder if it's because, well, maybe they're not connected, but then at the same time, it also doesn't make sense. Like I said, it's counterintuitive. So I want to get into why it is the greatest time to be alive today. And then I want to get into the trends and statistics of suicide. in the world. Well, actually, in the United States. Sorry, and then I want to get into why. Get a little bit into why they can be sort of related in a sense. So I was watching this YouTube video, and I'll put the link to it in the description. And this time I'll actually try to have most of my sources, if not all of them. So that was something I was lacking in the last video. But wow. So first thing that I want to explain to you is that there's these sort of statistics and these things we judge society on. For example, poverty, and then also income. And it's not a good judgment of the quality of life per se, because happiness is a different definition to everyone. And one person, you could have a rich person who is really sad and really depressed, and then you could have a poor person who is happy and they are totally content with life. So just keep that in mind. But I believe these statistics do speak for themselves. So the first one that is pretty impressive to me is that in 1990, 1.9 billion people lived in extreme poverty. And when they say extreme poverty, sources say that extreme poverty is earning $1.90 an hour. And I believe in 1990, back then, it was more around $1, but it's sort of adjusted for maybe inflation and then also the value. Well, yeah, the value of the dollar, obviously. But so 1.9 billion people, and keep in mind that the population was less back then. 1.9 billion people in extreme poverty in the world. It's not in the United States, in the world. And now only 760 million people in the world are in extreme poverty. So that number has been cut in half and then some, which I believe is a great thing. It's awesome. And here's another crazy thing is I'm sure we all kind of remember something in history class, learning about how the average life expectancy was like 30 years. Could you imagine living to 30 years old? And you're like, wow, all right, my life is going to end soon. That's awful by today's standards. But say a few hundred years ago is 30 years old. That was the average life expectancy. Now, on the global scale, the average life expectancy is 71 years old, and then 78 years old in the United States, which is pretty good. Here's another statistic that I learned. 15% used to die from war or murder, so violent crimes. And now only 6 to 8 out of 100,000 people die from war or murder in a more broad aspect, in a violent manner. And that's a global statistic as well. And food has gone up by 25%. 25% around the world. This is not just the United States, around the world. And in most of these statistics, the United States is often a little bit higher or much more higher than the global standard, which is great because that's what we're talking about. So another interesting thing, not so much about more of the value of it, something on a more broader scale. In 1900, there were only 11 democracies in the world, and now there are 90. And the number of autocracies, I think that's the right word, autocracies, has decreased by a lot. Now, a number of these statistics I got from a YouTube video of this man. He was doing a TED Talk, and he's a historian. He was doing a TED Talk in South Africa, and I will link that video. I don't want you to, I want to give credit where credit's due, and that's where I got my sources. So another source that I found from the CDC, which I believe is a great thing, in the United States, the rate of death by cancer has decreased by 25% from 1990 to 2014. That's a great thing. So what are these trends that we're seeing? The trend is people are earning more money, people are getting more food, people are dying less, and people are living healthier lives. And also, there's much more opportunity nowadays, especially in the United States. There's much more opportunity to succeed. And I also want to touch on the fact that in the United States in particular, and then in many places in the world, more than there are not, you have equality. And equality is a pretty great thing, because when you have equality of opportunity, it lets anyone have the opportunity to succeed and make something of themselves and create a life for themselves that they want. And you're seeing that in the United States. It's incredible that it was only 50, 60 years ago that there was not equality, especially in the United States, in how people were treated, and then also systemic inequality, I should say. 50, 60 years ago, that was not a long time ago. I'm sure everyone knows someone who is that old and older. So less than a lifetime ago, you have inequality, but now there is equality. There is no law, especially in the United States, that prohibits someone from succeeding based off something just because of gender or of race or a religion, let's say. And that's a great thing. That's not only the reason why I believe that is so great, and that's a really good thing compared to the other statistics. And don't get me wrong, the other statistics are phenomenal. I mean, I already said less people are dying, people are living longer, people are dying less of cancer. But the reason why I say the issue of equality is so important is because now it gives the fact that the lives of people itself, the life itself is becoming better. So this is something I have a lot of pride in, especially being an American. I'm really proud of the fact that the United States has come a long way, and we're now a place of equality, and we're also a place of better health and just a better, higher quality of living. And then now going into the suicide discussion, and you'll see, and this is why I call it the greatest sad time, because it's the greatest time to live, but yet suicide rates are going up. And it's troubling, because something that I see, that I've seen, that I've learned, is that suicide rates are actually going up for younger people. And there was this study done, I believe, so the CDC says that suicide has gone up 25% since 1990. And this is a pretty big, this next statistic is pretty important. So all of this information, just again, I want to stress the fact that all this information I'm giving you, I will cite, and the links to where I got my information from will be in the description. So feel free to look at that. So suicide is the second highest cause of death for people from ages 10 to 34. And the only thing that is it is second to accidents. So people dying of things that just are out of their control. And so these things that are out of their control, well, where was I going with that? This is where I was going with that. Suicide is something that is the exact opposite of things out of their control. So it's pretty sad that the one thing that is the total opposite of accidents, suicide, death because they wanted it, is actually the second highest reason for death in people from 10 to 34. And when you get into the higher age groups, the suicide is still up there, and suicide actually gets lower the older. So 65 and older, on average, suicide is a lower or it's the lowest cause of death compared to other things. And you get in more into things like disease, cancer, and actually, I think I saw a medical malpractice one for one age group, which is awful in of itself. But I want to know why suicide rates are increasing. That's very alarming, and it's troublesome because it wasn't like this. In 1990, there was much less suicides, and it's a problem that we're going to have to face. So some things that people have found, and BBC reported on this. They said that people are, per capita, to say people are more likely to commit suicide in rural areas, and they suggested that the reason is because you actually see these spikes in suicide when there's some sort of economic downturn. And the reason suicide is a little bit more prevalent in rural areas during economic downturn is because, I'm sure we all know this, is economic failures have a bigger burden on rural areas. It's much harder for them to get out of it. And you see that when you have recessions and things of that nature. Big cities can get out of it faster because they have more jobs, more people. And in rural areas, they just are incomparable. So the economic sort of saying, quote unquote, disasters actually stay with these people much longer than they do in the cities. And you'll notice that, I shouldn't say you'll notice, but BBC points out that a lot of people in these rural areas who have committed suicide, they found that the economy was starting to turn around and start going up, but they were stagnating. And that has some pretty big implications, because that sort of means that as a society, and I'm sure we all know this, we're starting to get into the material realm of life rather than the, well, non-material world. So it's kind of going back to, what is your greatest problem? And for a lot of people, that greatest problem is they're not earning enough by their own personal standards. And that's sad, because I think many people would agree that happiness doesn't come from earnings. And it's sad that someone feels that they should take their life because of that. And another, just the CDC pointed out that 2/3 of gun deaths are actually by suicide. And then the study done and cited in BBC also, they sort of say, well, what if it's just we have better data collecting? And that happens whenever you see something, a trend start increasing for over time. Every now and then it'll be because there's better data collection later on rather than earlier on. But a professor or a doctor dismissed it and said that they don't think that's the cause of it because there has been they've said poor mental health institution or institutions by the state. And what I mean by that is here's an example for that. Only 10 states in America actually mandate suicide prevention training for health professionals. And personally, I'm not a big fan of the government stepping in and telling people what they should learn and what they should practice. But I think even people with that aspect would agree that if the government's going to mandate something, mandating suicide prevention should be at the top of the list. And I mean, I think that's pretty bad, because when you have someone who is feeling so low that they feel that they need to take their own life, and then they want to reach out and they want to check themselves into an institution, what are the odds that they reach out and an institution is just too far? What if they're in, say, those rural areas and they want to reach out, and the nearest institution that can actually be of benefit to them is maybe 2, 3, 4 hours away? And then what if they go into those institutions and they don't get that much help? I mean, we said only 10 states mandate suicide prevention training for health professionals. So when they go into these mental institutions, these mental institutions could be geared towards people who have, I don't want to say serious problems, because the thoughts of suicide is very serious, but for lack of a better term, people who already have a mental illness, sort of a predisposed condition, like they have schizophrenia or they're bipolar, things of that nature. So they're more geared to treating people who have actual biological problems in their head. But then the problem is that sometimes these thoughts of suicide and stemming from extreme depression, these problems develop over time. They're not like other mental health issues, because a lot of other mental health issues people are already born with and they have to live with them. But I think that's something that makes suicide pretty heavy, is people who get to that point where they believe they need to take their life. It develops over a long period of time. And to go into that, I want to talk about how people get to that point of suicide. And I think when you actually analyze how people get to the point of suicide, when you talk about that, you sort of start to see the reasons why people might be committing suicide. And some of these problems, some of these things that get to that lead to this development, they actually start much longer, or much they start before. I'm sorry, I can't speak right now. They start a long time before they actually start thinking about suicide. Sorry about that, but that's what I was meaning to say. So anyways, let me regroup here. I gotta work on speaking. So I was watching a TED Talk, and I'll put the link below. And this guy was talking about sort of our boy. It was, the title of the video was something like "Our boys are in trouble. America's boys are in trouble." And he was saying that he brought up this really interesting statistic, something that's so, the statistic is so heavy that it implies a lot, and something that you just can't ignore. It almost changes the way you have to attack the problem here. And he said, and I don't remember the exact numbers, but he was talking about the fact that as people get older, so boys, as they get older, are much more likely to commit suicide than girls. So as they get older, there's a higher number of boys committing suicide than there are girls. And the numbers he provides they kind of stop you in your tracks, and you're like, okay, we really need to solve this problem. And he talks about how to solve it. And I don't want to get too much into it because I invite you to watch the video. It's a great video. And he talks about the fact that there are people, or the biggest problem with kids committing suicide is they're growing up without a dad. And he cited sources and evidence saying that kids who grew up without a dad are much more likely to engage in violent activity. They're much more likely to develop sort of mental health conditions, and that's pretty serious, because personally, I think when you grow up without a dad, especially for a young boy, it's hard, because being a man is such a complicated thing, because in society, and there's this other TED Talk who this man talks about the societal norm of men to ignore their emotions. So it's hard growing up as a boy, because in society we kind of say, men just need to leave their emotions at the door, and they can't express themselves. And when you have this buildup of emotion, and then when society is telling them you're not supposed to express your emotions, they feel like when they need to, it's gotten to the point where they need to express their feelings, they just feel like they can't. And that feeling creates a lot of loneliness and a lot of instability mentally. And that's what leads to thoughts of suicide, deep depression, and then in the worst cases, suicide. So the problem here is that when you're growing up without a dad, your dad helps lead the way of figuring out, or at least is by societal terms, helps you figure out how to cope with the emotions you feel as a man, and then also fulfilling the needs that a man is supposed to in our society. And those are pretty heavy topics, and they're pretty complex, both of them. So when you have someone who grows up without a dad, they tend to resort to other things that might provide that sort of father figure in their life. And there's actually a lot of evidence to claim that's why a lot of kids go join gangs, because they're just crying out for relationships with men who are older than them. And so where I'm going with this is, I see a big need for just the fact that we need to keep dads in the family, and it's important. And another thing is, you look at, and I know school shootings are a little bit of a different topic than what we're talking about in this video, but you look at a lot of the kids who have, and I say kids because we all know majority of them are young men, and they excuse me, most of them grew up without a dad. And if they grew up with both parents, you find that sometimes their parents were negligent. And I think that's such a big problem, and no one's talking about it. I don't see in the mainstream media, this kid came from a family with no dad, or a broken family. And then when people see that, they're too quick to blame other things like race, or the fact that he had a gun. Oh, he had a gun, let's ban all guns. Oh, a lot of these kids are doing it are white. Well, I don't want to make this part of the video too politicized, because that's not at least what this video is about. But how about let's look at something that is more pertinent to the argument. All of these boys are growing up without a father. That's something that could have been changed. Just because of their race, they couldn't change that because of their race. And then the gun aspect, I don't like that one either, because guess what? There are so many great instances where a gun is needed. And like I said, I don't want to get into a big political debate about it. But my point here is we have to address the problem. And the problem is that these kids are growing up without a family, and people are too quick to say that the media won't portray them as the monster they are. Well, yeah, they are portraying them as another human being, because what people don't realize is if they grew up in the same conditions that say a troubled young man who commits these school shootings or commits suicide, if they grew up in those conditions, they might have a better understanding of why that kid did that. I'm not justifying those actions, but I'm saying that we're all human and we're all subject to those problems. So the thing here is that we need to start talking about a different discussion, and that discussion is growing up without a family. And then also another point I want to make, so you find kids who are committing suicide. They're growing up without a father. They're growing up with negligent parents. Same thing for kids who are committing school shootings, and school shootings is not a great example, because they're, especially compared to suicides, there is so much there's just by volume way less school shootings than there are suicides, but it's a point nonetheless. And then a third point I'd like to point out is serial killers. We all know these people have super horrible thoughts. And you listen, there's this podcast that I listened to for a little while. It's called Serial Killers. And I kid you not, in the podcast, they don't point out the connection. Every now and then they mention a little bit, but they don't necessarily point out the connection of each serial killer. And you'll notice, listen for it, every serial killer grew up with a horrible, horrible childhood. And it's like, if they're all grown up with a horrible childhood, maybe that's the culprit. And maybe we see this trend of kids committing suicide, and kids doing school shootings, and then serial killers. They all come from these terrible childhoods. So that's something we need to be aware of. And I'm not saying that there's any, I certainly don't know of any way to correct that problem. And I'm not going to sit there and tell someone how to do it. But at the same time, I can also give you some advice. If you are someone who grew up with a bad childhood and certain things that were just much further out of the norm than most people, I encourage you to reach out to those in your life that do care about you. And maybe they care about you, but you're not very close to them. So I encourage you to get very close with them, because when you're close with people who care about you, that's when you can express your problems to them. And when you can just the fact of getting it out, like when people, just the fact of, or the action of venting helps so much. So if you can, I encourage you, find that person and strengthen that relationship with them, or a few people, strengthen your relationships with them. And because the sad part is that the time behind you can't get back. So what you can do is you can have a say in the time coming at you. And with that, you strengthen your relationships. So that's about, in my honest opinion, that's the best way we can solve this problem coming forward. And then also, because this series is geared more towards the younger generation, I want you guys, anyone who's listening, especially if you're younger, to realize the implications of a bad childhood, and realize the importance of the family, realizing how important it is to be a good dad, to be a good mom. These things are so important in raising a child and raising a functioning human being, and not just a functioning human being, but someone who can have purpose in their life and happiness in their life. And and that's that's the best I can tell you, because I don't want to act like I know everything, but from my honest perspective and experience, I believe that is the best way to solve these problems, is to reform the family. So I spent a big deal on the family being the cause, family and childhood in particular being the cause of suicide, and like many big problems, there's never just one cause. And another cause that I'm seeing, and I spoke about the childhood and the family first, and I spent the most amount of time on that because I believe it is the most important. Now, there are two other things that I want to talk about that I think could be contributing factors to a spike in suicide. And the first, or I should say the second one, is social media. And so I will cite some websites that I got this information from, but they actually noticed that from the time that social media started to the present day, rates in anxiety, depression, and then also suicides amongst teens has increased. So that's this is something I want to be clear about. There's a great term, and I think it applies here. Correlation does not always mean causation, but I think it's something that we all kind of have a hunch about, right? Because we've all heard the talks about social media makes you more depressed. And from a personal experience, every time that I take a few days, a week, a few weeks off social media, I feel so much better. I feel much better. And I'm just a much happier person, it feels like, and I enjoy personal interactions much more, it seems. And I don't want to go too deep into the whole social media aspect, because that's a deep problem in of itself, and I'll probably save that for another video. But nonetheless, it is something that could be a contributing factor. And then there's also clear things about social media that can lead to suicide. Case in point being cyberbullying. And cyberbullying, I mean, you could devote a whole video to that. And so that's another cause, or that, yeah, in many cases, that is a cause of suicide amongst teens, which is just absolutely sad. I mean, cyberbullying is a terrible thing, because the people don't even have the guts to do it in person. And I'm not saying in person's better, but they're just people who cyberbully are cowards. And I encourage you, if you are getting cyberbullied, I welcome you. If you want to reach out to me, you can. Feel free to. And I'm not sure how much of help I could be to you, but the best help I could advise to you is take a break off social media. And I know that's not always a surefire solution, but take a break. And sort of the same thing with the family. Invest more time in relationships with people that care about you. And if you're feeling so alone that you feel that there's just not anybody around you who cares about you, go to your school, especially in younger people, obviously, go to your school, go talk to someone who is trained and paid to deal with sorts of problems like these, because I promise you there are people out there who will listen to you, and listening to people with these problems is the most important step. The first step that should be taken is someone needs to listen. And so many times people who take their own lives, they just feel like no one listens, no one cares. And that's very sad. So I kind of went off on a little bit of a tangent, but so we see that there is sort of this weird correlation, and it's a fishy correlation between suicide and social media. And that sort of brings me to my third and final cause, as I see it, of suicide. And I think it's something that's not really been talked it's not been talked about a lot, and I've only ever heard one person talk about it. And I've always been wary about this problem. I'm like, the problem I'm referring to is this thing called the Werther Effect. And I encourage you to look it up and maybe learn a little bit more about it. But in a sense, the Werther Effect comes from this really old story about this. I believe this guy's name was Werther, and he killed himself. And it was basically sort of having a hard time coming up with the word, but it was like a noble thing. It was almost like he was dying heroically, but it was suicide. And so in the story, people just start killing themselves because this guy Werther, who I've not read the story, but this is just the gist of it that I get from reading summaries about it. This guy just killed himself, and he had some weight in society, as in he had some impact, and he died heroically, and people started killing themselves. So how does that relate to today? When I'm sure you guys can remember when Kate Spade and Anthony Bourdain killed themselves. I believe it was in the same week, if not in a week, something close to a week. But the National Suicide Prevention Hotline, their numbers, or sorry, the amount of calls to that hotline spiked by 25% after both of those suicides. So I think the Werther effect is a super complicated problem, because if I'm trying to come up with a word to describe the Werther effect from the story, as in dying for a noble, like killing himself as a noble thing. But I apologize, the word's just not coming to me. But when you have people who commit suicide, and then it's broadcasted in the news, no one's ever saying that they died like they were justified to kill themselves. No, I'm not accusing anyone of saying that, but it's this weird effect, the Werther effect, that people, it seems that, this is the word, it seems a little bit romanticized, and that's a problem, because when you have these public figures who are idols to some people commit suicide, and then maybe these people are famous, so they have a large following. These people look up to them, and maybe some of those people are having a really hard time in their lives, and they're like, well, one of my heroes just killed themselves, why shouldn't I? And I hope no one thinks that, but that trend, that 25% spike in calls to the suicide hotline, I think is it's something to take note of, because it almost seems like spreading talking about suicide so much, it almost sort of dilutes the impact of it. And that that's really so. I'm not saying it does for sure, but it seems like it could in a way. And maybe it's not in a excuse me, in a drastic sense. Maybe it only has that effect a little bit. But if that effect, I think it's worth talking about if something like the Werther effect pertains to maybe a small minority of those who've commit suicide. Maybe they would never say it themselves, but at the underlying cause, if a small group of people who've committed suicide did it because something related to the Werther effect, I think it's important to talk about. So there are sort of my three reasons as to why suicide has spiked, and it's because we have this a degradation in the family, and then we also have problems with social media. And I want to let you know that I will be doing a podcast on the whole social media problem. And I don't want to, I'm not going to call it a problem in the video. I'll think of something a little bit more accurate to describe it, because it is such a strange beast to tackle, if you will. And then you also have, pertaining to suicide, you also have the Werther effect. And so tying back into the beginning, it's the greatest time to be alive, but yet suicides are increasing. And that doesn't, like I said, it's counterintuitive. So everything from this point pretty much is speculation on my part. I want to make that clear. I don't want to act like I have definite knowledge in some field that people are looking for an answer in. To me, the stats of life getting better sort of proves the fact that humans are evolving in a very, very new way. And we're evolving in the sense that we are living longer, and we have such a vast access to information. It's uncanny. I mean, to say something else, it's ridiculous. And this evolution in humanity is going to create problems like this. The problem of the quality, or the time to be alive being at its best, and then yet something like suicide is going up. So many problems are being solved. Technology is getting so much better. Health is getting better. That people are dying less of cancers and of diseases, and people are getting critical illness less, and people are earning more money. But I don't think much of that has a lot of weight if the life itself is not getting better. So I'm proposing that we as a society are working to make everything in life better, but we also need to make life itself better. Sort of more of the intangible things. A lot, going back to the second question I asked you, what's the greatest thing in your life? What's the greatest thing about your life? Most people, I would be willing to bet, are going to say something that is more intangible. Say something like, I love my life because I love my family, or I love my life because I'm having a I'm having a son, or I love my life because I'm working to make other people's lives better. It's this work to make life itself better, and that is usually associated with some of the best aspects of our own lives. And if that is associated with the best aspects of our lives, we need to make sure that we work on on evolving that itself. We are evolving things that are more tangible, money and materialistic things, but we need to evolve the intangible things in relationships with others. I mean, you talk to older people who are. I've heard so many stories of older people close to dying, and what they tell you is you don't remember the time you bought an amazing, you bought this car, or you bought these great shoes, or these very materialistic things. They tell you that's not the stuff you remember. That's not the stuff you reflect on when it's time to pass on. The things you reflect on are the relationships. And if there's anything that I hope you can take away from this video, it's that relationships are the most important thing in our lives. And it's something that as an individual, we need to be conscientious of, and we need to work to make sure that the relationships with those in our lives are the best that they can be. Because when they are the best that they can be, we are the happiest that we can be. And when they are not the best that they can be, when they are broken, we see that suicide rates go higher. People just sort of lose it. And sorry, I'm living in a dorm. I don't know if you can hear it, but some of my dorm mates are getting crazy themselves. But that's dorm life. Anyway, sorry about that. But to sorry, my concentration is broken a little bit there. But my final conclusion for this video is, as a society, and then also as an individual, every person can work to make their relationships better. And if you can help fortify a relationship with someone else, that's going to help their lives. That you're helping someone by strengthening the relationship with them. Let's say you do that to 2 or 3 people. You just made 2 or 3 people's lives better. And then they are getting this fulfillment, this happiness from their relationship with you. It inspires them to strengthen their relationship with others. That's why, well, and then when they feel inspired to do that, it just grows, and it grows quickly, and it's just a boom. So that's why you can help. You can help this problem that we see in society. You think, oh, this problem is too big. How can I tackle it? You can, because the ripple effects are huge. If you just start with yourself, start with the relationships in your life, the succeeding effects of it will just be insurmountable. It'll just be amazing. And I know it's a lot to ask for, but you can start in baby steps. Start with baby steps, and I'm telling you, it'll be worth it. And the society itself will be much better off, and you will see, I believe, an evolution of humanity that is much more important than this technological evolution that we're seeing. It's going to be much more important and have a much better effect on us as humans. So thank you so much for listening, and I really, really appreciate the time. And I know this episode went longer than the first one, but if you enjoyed this, and if you can take something away from this video, that means I've done my job. And please help me out. Help me spread this message. If it's touched you enough, help me spread it to others so I can have these good messages to other people, and like this video, subscribe, tell people about it. I would really appreciate it. And it was an absolute pleasure being able to talk to you about this problem, and I'm glad that you stuck around this far. And please, I hope to see you in the next video, and I hope you take care, and I hope you start to work on the relationships in your life, because life itself will get better. So with that, I will end, and thank you very much for joining me, and I hope your life gets better. Good luck to you.